They never found his birth record. No grave, no school enrollment, no trace of a boy named Timothy Caldwell until he appeared in the basement of a Missouri farmhouse, dissecting a cat. In 1865, at the end of the bloodiest war in American history, when the air still smelled of gunpowder and rot, something older and darker than war slipped quietly through the cracks of reason. A child, if you could still call him that, walked barefoot down the road to Sedalia with eyes that didn't blink and fingers that never stopped moving. Locals said he could hear things that weren't spoken. Doctors said he could remember things no child had ever been taught. But it was what he did in silence that terrified them most. The first time they tried to test his intelligence, he corrected the doctor's Latin. The second time, he asked why human brains turned grey after death. The third time, someone died. Timothy Caldwell wasn't born like the rest of us, and science, in its arrogance, couldn't explain what it didn't understand. So it locked him away, labeled him unstable, exceptionally gifted, dangerously dispassionate. But what they didn't realize is that you cannot lock away what you've already invited in. This isn't a story about a boy. It's a story about what hides behind the face of innocence, and the system that saw what he was, and still chose to let him walk free. Because the real horror? They used him. And when he became inconvenient, they erased the evidence. You've never been told this part of American history because it cuts too close to the truth, not just about Timothy Caldwell, but about how institutions weaponize gifted minds when they think no one's watching. This story has been buried under decades of silence, scattered police files, and whispers from retired doctors who died before they could confess. But tonight, the silence ends. Because if you follow this trail deep enough, you'll realize Timothy was not an accident. He was a product, and he was only the beginning. This rabbit hole is real. And once you hear what he became, you won't look at compassion, medicine, or children the same way again. Now listen carefully. This is where the descent begins. In the official records of Sedalia County, Timothy Caldwell's file is mostly blank. No next of kin, no cause of institutionalization, no record of release. Just one entry, dated November the 4th, 1865, scribbled in faded ink. Boy brought in by sheriff, claims no memory of family, highly intelligent, unnerving behavior, requests further observation. Requests, as if anyone was asking for what came next. Dr. Samuel Harding was the first to evaluate him. A seasoned physician hardened by battlefield surgeries and asylum corridors that stank of urine and screams. He thought he'd seen everything, until Timothy. In his journals, never published, hidden in a locked trunk until decades after his death, Harding describes Timothy not as a patient, but as a presence. The child does not flinch at violence. He asks questions no child should know to ask. He stares into people the way surgeons examine tumors. Timothy didn't speak for the first 72 hours, just watched how the nurses walked, how the locks turned, how the orderlies flinched. Then he asked one question: why do you give sedatives to the ones who see clearly? And when Harding asked what he meant, Timothy just smiled, like he knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. Within weeks, strange things started happening inside Missouri State Hospital. A nurse found her keys rearranged in a perfect Fibonacci spiral. A janitor reported that every clock on the ward stopped at 3:33 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. Patients began whispering about a blue-eyed boy who never slept, who moved without sound, who could predict when people would die. The hospital chalked it up to mass hysteria. Harding didn't. He began studying Timothy obsessively, charting his behavior, recording their conversations, documenting moments of brilliance that bordered on the supernatural. One night, Harding left a complex anatomical chart in the boy's room, human nervous system, unlabeled. The next morning, Timothy had relabeled every nerve, in perfect Latin, but when asked how he knew any of it, the boy gave no answer. "It's just what comes before the remembering," he said. That sentence haunted Harding for years, because it wasn't just that Timothy was smart, it was that he didn't learn the way other humans did. He remembered, as if he had lived other lives, or worse, as if something else was remembering through him. You think this is just another haunted prodigy story? You're not listening closely enough. This wasn't a child with a gift. It was a mind calibrated by something outside our understanding, something precise, emotionless, and ancient. It wasn't long before Timothy Caldwell began drawing. Not with crayons, not with childlike wonder, but with surgical accuracy, ink on butcher paper, charcoal on asylum walls, ash and spit when no tools were given. The staff laughed at first, a child doodling to pass the time, they said. But then they saw what he was drawing. Veins, tendons, pineal glands, detailed schematics of human organs not from school books, but from angles only a surgeon or a butcher could know. He drew the exact muscle system of a horse's neck, the shattered bone of a soldier's femur mid-exploded, an autopsy cross-section of a frontal lobe labeled in mirror writing. He was 8 years old. Harding once asked him where he saw these things. Timothy replied, "I remember them, from before they died." The boy never smiled when he said things like that. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was just telling the truth, as if it were as normal as breathing. Soon the staff began requesting transfers. Nurses refused to enter his room alone. One orderly broke down sobbing after a night shift, screaming that the boy had spoken to him in his mother's voice. The woman had been dead for 3 years. Still, the doctors insisted Timothy remain under observation, because while the others saw something broken, Harding saw something else: potential. He began structuring daily sessions with Timothy, verbal tests, memory games, empathy drills, but the results never matched any known profile. Timothy could mimic emotion with chilling precision. He could cry on cue, laugh with perfect rhythm, even describe trauma that he had never experienced. But it was hollow. When asked what scared him, he answered, "Not being useful. Useful, not safe, not loved. Useful." And that's when Harding made a decision, one he would regret until his dying day. He began teaching the boy. Not in the way we teach children, when the nursery rhymes and patience, but like a recruit, a vessel, a tool to be sharpened. By candlelight they studied surgical diagrams. By day Timothy observed the dying in the trauma ward. And by night, he asked questions, the kind that made Harding sweat in his sleep. How long does pain stay in the brain after the heart stops? Can a person's last thought be stolen? And always, the final question: what am I for? Not who am I? What? Spring of 1866. A patient on the women's ward dies in her sleep. Natural causes, they say, but the attending nurse swears she saw a small figure walking the hallway at 3 a.m. No shoes, no sound, just pale eyes, open too wide for a sleeping boy. Harding checks the logs. Timothy was locked in his room. But the lock wasn't broken. It was picked. They found a sharpened spoon hidden in the mattress, and a map of the hospital, drawn to scale, etched into the underside of the bed frame. Timothy had begun mapping the building, tracking movements, guard shifts, meal rotations. He wasn't trying to escape. He was studying behavior. "You can't break a system," he said once, "if you don't know how it breathes." Harding tried to report the incident, but the superintendent overruled him. "The boy is a case study," he said. "A specimen. Do your job." And so Harding did. He dug deeper. One night, he left Timothy with a cadaver, an anonymous war veteran whose body had been donated for study. Harding intended it as a test. Would the boy recoil? Would he show fear, hesitation? He didn't. Timothy unwrapped the sheet, stared at the corpse for several minutes, then asked, "Why do they sew the mouth shut if there's no more sound?" By morning, the cadaver's rib cage had been opened, cleanly, each organ placed in perfect alignment along the floor, arranged like a language only Timothy could read. Harding didn't punish him. He wrote it down. That was the first real breach, the moment when Harding stopped being a doctor and became something else. A handler, a facilitator. Because he was beginning to suspect the truth. Timothy didn't lack empathy. He had never needed it. Empathy slows down reaction time. Empathy hesitates when surgery must be swift. Empathy panics when the body suffers. Timothy had none of those obstacles, and the war had left thousands broken, bodies and minds, P for experimentation, hidden in the asylums, the hospitals, the forgotten corners of a healing nation. Timothy became Harding's unspoken weapon, a living scalpel, precise, unburdened, flawless. They moved him to a private wing. They gave him cleaner tools, and they began feeding him subjects, not patients, subjects, and yet no one on the outside noticed. Because the asylum was never designed to heal. It was built to disappear people and to study what could be done once the world forgot they existed. It wasn't just Harding anymore. By the end of 1866, a quiet flow of visitors began arriving at Missouri State Hospital, men in long coats, with questions too precise to be casual. They weren't doctors, they weren't clergy, and they never signed the guest log. They came at night. They asked to see the boy. One brought a briefcase filled with anatomy diagrams in German. Another carried photographs of battlefield surgeries taken in secret, never meant for public eyes. They watched Timothy like collectors examining a rare specimen, not with wonder, but calculation. Harding's journal refers to them only as the observers. They said he's an anomaly. I think they're wrong, he wrote. Anomalies are accidents. This feels like design. It was around this time that Timothy stopped responding to his own name. When called, he would tilt his head, as if listening to something deeper, an internal voice louder than yours. He wasn't forgetting who he was disassociating, fragmenting. They asked him to perform tests, emotional recognition, linguistic replication, rapid response diagnostics. He aced them all. But then the tests changed. They gave him pain thresholds, how much discomfort he could tolerate without flinching, how long he could hold his hand in boiling water, how many volts before the twitch. Harding protested, at first, then he stopped, because something inside him had shifted too. It wasn't just about studying Timothy anymore. It was about protecting him, because Harding had seen enough to understand. Timothy was not alone in his mind. There was a pattern behind his thoughts, a rhythm that didn't belong to childhood. He once caught Timothy whispering to himself in a language no one could identify. Phonetic records were sent to the Smithsonian. The response came back. No match, possibly invented, but structurally consistent with Proto-Indo-European Ro. How does an 8-year-old reconstruct a lost language that predates written history? He doesn't. Unless he's remembering. Unless memory itself isn't bound to one lifetime. Unless there are minds born not to evolve, but to restore something older. Something we've spent centuries trying to bury. Timothy didn't become what he was. He was a recall, an echo of knowledge that should have died in the ash and blood of forgotten rituals, and Harding, now fully under the current of this forbidden stream, began to record less in his journals and more in code. Because the deeper you go, the more you realize. Truth doesn't get erased, it gets encrypted. Winter of 1866 came hard. Blizzards shut down the outer wards, the dead piled in the cellar. And still, in the dim, oil-lit halls of the hospital's west wing, the experiments continued. But something had changed in Timothy. He no longer asked questions. He stopped mimicking emotions, stopped pretending to be a child. Now he simply observed, still, cold, awake long after lights out, eyes fixed on corners of the ceiling, as if he could see through the plaster into something else. Harding tried to reach him, brought puzzles, stories, the scent of lavender, Timothy's favorite. Nothing. Until one night, the boy finally spoke. He pointed to the wall behind Harding and said, "It's listening." Harding turned. Nothing there. "What's listening, Timothy?" The boy blinked. "The part of you that doesn't sleep." That night, Harding started keeping the lamp on in his quarters. He stopped reading alone. And in his dreams, he heard knocking, not on doors, but inside his skull, rhythmic, measured, like Morse code carved into bone. Meanwhile, the observers returned. But now they were uneasy. One of them, a man identified only in Harding's notes as Dr. G, refused to enter Timothy's room after dusk. Said the shadows were wrong in there, that the temperature dropped when the boy looked directly at you. Another reported auditory hallucinations after just 20 minutes near the child. A third claimed he heard the exact voice of his dead wife whisper the words, "He knows." But what did Timothy know? Harding, in his desperation, began reviewing every autopsy, every test, every forgotten document in the asylum's archives. That's when he found it. A single page, dated August the 3rd, 1843, 19 years before Timothy's birth. It was a birthing report, unusual. The mother had no name. The location, redacted, but the description was chilling. Child born with silent lungs. Eyes open. No pulse for 6 minutes. Then, heartbeat resumes. Inexplicable revival. Subject placed under long-term observation. The birth weight, the blood type, the name scrawled in a faded margin, Timothy Caldwell. But this was impossible. That would make him 23 years old, not 9. Unless he had been here before. Not in spirit, not metaphorically, literally. The same name, the same eyes, the same quiet hunger. And as Harding read the final line of the document, the air in the room shifted. Subject classified as non-terminal, knowledge retentive, temporally fixed, not born, not reborn, inserted. By the spring of 1867, Harding was no longer documenting Timothy's behavior as a scientist. He was tracking something else. A pattern. A cycle. Every 2 months, Timothy would become silent for days. The same days, every cycle. His eyes would darken, his body still, his breathing slow, then nothing. Then, on the 7th day, he would return. Eyes open, body restored. And as if nothing had changed, he would resume his work. But this time, Harding noticed something different. There were small fractures, tiny, invisible cracks, beginning to form in the walls of Timothy's story. Things he couldn't account for. A slip of the tongue, an odd gesture, a change in posture. It was as if Timothy had forgotten something, or worse, something was forgetting him. Harding's obsession with the boy deepened, pulling him further from his colleagues and closer to the brink of madness. The more he dug into Timothy's records, the more inconsistencies appeared. None of the doctors who had signed off on Timothy's initial treatment plan had ever worked at Missouri State Hospital. There were no records of Timothy's birth, no records of his family. But in every hospital ledger, in every file, there was one name that kept surfacing, Dr. Nathaniel Caldwell, a physician who had worked at the hospital in the 1840s. A doctor who had no known obituary, no gravestone. And yet, he had written the first observations on Timothy's condition, handwritten notes that seemed oddly familiar, like reading Harding's own thoughts. The most unsettling entry? Subject's mind may be beyond the reach of time. The deeper Harding went, the more it became clear. Timothy was not a patient. He was a project, a perfect living cipher, designed to be studied, exploited, and erased when no longer useful. But why? It wasn't just about power. It wasn't about control. It was about survival. The more Harding discovered, the more he understood. There was a deeper game at play, a game that transcended medicine, logic, and human understanding. The boy was a tool, yes, but a tool for what? For who? In the quiet corridors of Missouri State Hospital, Timothy was something much more dangerous than an anomalous child. He was a vessel, a doorway. Harding's mind began to fracture as the answers slipped further out of reach. The more he uncovered, the less he felt grounded in the present. It was as if time itself was folding in on him, collapsing into a single, hollow point where reality began to lose its grip. The others, the observers, the officials, had all become part of the system. They had been swallowed by the same machine that created Timothy. And now, Harding was close to understanding the truth. Timothy Caldwell wasn't just a boy with unnatural gifts. He was a memory, a reclamation. And once you start pulling at the thread of time, you can't stop what comes unraveling next. On the morning of June 11th, 1867, something happened that was never entered into the hospital records, because no one who witnessed it spoke of it again. 3 patients died simultaneously. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no poison in their blood. They were found in different wings of the hospital, yet all were discovered with identical expressions. Mouths open in terror, eyes wide, muscles contorted as if gasping at something only they could see. And in each of their palms, a word carved into flesh. Unbound. That same night, Timothy was seen standing barefoot in the courtyard during a lightning storm. No coat, no fear. His arms raised to the sky, whispering something in a language no one could identify. Not Latin, not Greek, not anything known to Harding or the linguists brought in afterward. When questioned the next day, Timothy said only one thing: they weren't supposed to wake up. Harding's journal shifted in tone after that. No longer the notes of a curious researcher. Now they read like confessionals, like a man writing to keep his sanity. He began describing dreams, fragments of time that did not belong to him, moments from wars he'd never fought in, cities that didn't exist yet, people who called him by names he didn't recognize. But Timothy knew those names. He spoke of events that hadn't happened, quoted philosophers yet to be born, corrected Harding's thoughts before he had them. And each time he did, he'd end with the same chilling phrase, "You're remembering it backward." That's when Harding began to understand the core of the anomaly. Timothy didn't exist within time. Time existed within him. Every institution, every experiment, every measurement, they were trying to capture a being who could not be bound by linear cause and effect. And worse still, someone had known this all along. Because inside the sealed basement vault of the hospital, where only directors had access, Harding found something else, a preserved corpse, floating in a jar of black liquid, unlabeled, unclaimed, but unmistakable. The same face, same crooked tooth, same scar under the eye. Timothy Caldwell, dead, preserved, dated 1865. 2 years before the boy ever arrived. Now there were 2 timelines, 2 bodies, 2 truths. Either someone was lying to the world, or the world itself was a lie wrapped around a child who refused to stay dead. The preserved corpse in the jar wasn't an illusion. It had fingerprints, retinal tissue, even dental structure, perfectly matching the living Timothy. Harding ran tests, quietly, repeatedly, desperately. And each time the results confirmed what should have been impossible. The body in the jar was Timothy Caldwell. So who, or what, was the boy walking the halls above? The question consumed Harding, and when he approached the hospital board with his findings, they responded with smiles too wide, words too calm. Perhaps, they said, you should take a leave. Your health, after all, has been under strain. That same evening, Harding returned to his office to find all his notes gone. Journals, samples, diagrams, the x-rays, even the stolen lock of Timothy's hair he'd hidden inside a hollowed-out book, gone. But on his desk, a single page remained. A different kind of paper, aged, brittle, ink faded with time, not written by Harding. It read, "He is not born, he is recalled. He walks the corridor between memory and matter, and when the corridor collapses, so will we." There was no signature, only a date, 41. Harding now understood what the others refused to face. Timothy wasn't the problem. He was the signal. A glitch in the continuity of time. A symptom of something unraveling, something deeper, older, systemic. It wasn't about the boy. It was about the structure we all live in. Time, memory, identity. All of it built like scaffolding over something ancient and buried. And now, It was rising again. That's when Harding began noticing the bleed. The same patient appearing in 2 wings of the hospital on the same day. Newspapers with headlines from 2 weeks in the future. A man claiming to be a janitor who knew Harding's full name, despite never being hired. Clocks skipping backward at 3:03 a.m., only in Timothy's wing. Then came the dreams. Not just Harding's, but others. Patients, nurses, even guards, reporting visions of a tall, pale corridor lined with rusted doors, and always, at the end, a boy. Silent, watching. Some said he spoke to them, some said he screamed, but most said he opened something. And when asked what was behind the door, they all used the same word without having ever spoken to one another. Us. The time for doubt was over. Harding had crossed a line. He had seen too much. And Timothy, once the observed, was now observing, staring from the end of the hall, waiting, patient. And behind his stillness was a question no one wanted to ask. If Timothy Caldwell was not alive, what does that make the rest of us? The final break came not with thunder, but with silence. July 3rd, 1867, 3:03 a.m. Every window in the hospital shattered at once. No wind, no storm, no intruder. Glass exploded outward, not inward, as if something inside the hospital had been trying to escape. But no alarms were triggered, no guards responded, no patients screamed. Because in that moment, everyone inside the hospital was asleep, simultaneously. Even those on stimulants, even the insomniacs who hadn't slept in days, all except one. Timothy Caldwell was awake, standing at the center of the hallway, barefoot again, his hands raised, not in worship, but in command. Security footage didn't exist back then, but Harding described it in his final journal, a page written in frantic pen scratches, as if time was closing in on him. He opened his mouth but didn't speak. The air shimmered. I heard my name from behind my own eyes. And then, in his final line, scribbled at the edge of the page, "He is remembering us into existence." That phrase broke Harding's mind. He was institutionalized the next day. When they found him, he was murmuring the same phrase over and over, staring at a corner of his office where the wall had been burned into a spiral. He's not from the future. He's from after. After what? The world? The lie? The veil? Nobody knows. Because Harding disappeared 3 days later, vanished from a locked cell with 2 guards posted at his door. No forced entry, no footprints, no trace. All that remained was a trail of dried salt leading to the barred window, and a single word scratched into the floor. Key. That was the final record in the hospital's archives regarding Dr. Malcolm Harding. But Timothy, he remained, untouched, unaffected, unquestioned, because the board had changed. New men arrived, names that didn't appear on any official government record. They wore pins in the shape of a downward-pointing eye, and they never blinked. The hospital became quieter after that. No more experiments, no more files, no more questions. But the spiral marks kept appearing, etched into walls, drawn in blood by sleepwalking patients, even scorched into the wood of Timothy's bedpost. One by one, the original staff either disappeared or died suddenly. Accidents, illnesses, drownings. Some walked into the forest and were never seen again. And still, Timothy sat quietly, drawing spirals, staring at walls that weren't there, waiting for something only he knew was coming. And when asked what he was waiting for, he would answer with a whisper so soft it made grown men tremble. For the rest of me to arrive. For the rest of me to arrive. That's what Timothy whispered, again and again, to nurses, to doctors, to shadows. But no one knew what it meant. Until August 9th, 1867, when the second boy arrived. He was found standing on the front steps of the hospital. No clothes, no scars, no speech. But his face His face was identical to Timothy Caldwell. The same glass-grey eyes, the same fractured molar, the same strand of white hair tucked behind his left ear. But this one didn't speak, didn't eat. He only stared into corners, into cracks, into mirrors. They called him Subject B. The staff had questions, of course, but none were allowed. The men with the downturned eye pins had become ever-present, watching from the upper halls. They confiscated reports before they were written. One nurse was fired for sketching the boy's face in a private diary. Another was never seen again after asking, "Are we next?" The hospital became colder, not in temperature, but in spirit, like something ancient had crawled inside the walls and made itself home. And then came the third. This one arrived not on foot, but in a crate. No return address, no shipping record, just an iron box, humming. Inside, a boy, aged precisely 7, unconscious, but breathing. When he awoke, he whispered 2 words. Not yet. That same day, all the clocks in the East Wing reversed for exactly 7 minutes. Everyone inside forgot who they were. One surgeon began operating on a wall, believing it was a living patient. Another man tried to hang a calendar on a patient's face, and when time snapped back into place, none of them remembered. The incident was never reported. Instead, the file was labeled Controlled Discontinuity, No Public Record. Now there were 3 boys, all identical. None officially named Timothy, and yet, all clearly him. They were never seen together, always kept in different wings, but the whispers said otherwise. Nurses claimed to see all 3 standing at the end of the corridor during night shift. One even claimed they fused into a single figure when lightning struck the hospital roof. But no proof ever survived the next day. By now, the original staff was nearly all gone, replaced by men who never smiled, women who never blinked. They didn't talk about medicine anymore. They talked about containment. The children weren't patients now. They were considered anchors, not of this world, but of something else, something trying to press its weight through the cracks of our reality. And the question was no longer, who is Timothy Caldwell? It became, how many of him are there? How many of him are there? By autumn of 1867, the question had metastasized into panic, quiet panic, buried under professional smiles and tightened protocols. The new directors had a name for the phenomenon now, self-refractive identity breach. But the nurses still called them all one thing: Timothy. The 3 boys weren't growing, not physically. Still the same height, same weight, same dental pattern. But mentally, something had accelerated. Subject A, the original, stopped responding to his name. Subject B began sketching labyrinths no one could navigate, and Subject C began speaking in reverse, not backwards English, inverted thought, words that made listeners bleed from the nose. Even Dr. Petra Langley, one of the few remaining from the original hospital staff, began to break down. Her notes from November the 2nd, "They're not 3 boys, they're 3 windows, or maybe 3 keys to a single door, but no one knows which way the door swings, inward or outward." That same night, Petra vanished. Her office was locked from the inside. All that remained was her chair spinning, and the phrase 3 is a start carved into her mirror from behind. The hospital was now more fortress than clinic, more shrine than shelter. Hallways were lined with reflective glass, not to see into rooms, but to reflect something out. Nurses were issued gloves laced with lead. Notebooks were now burned after 24 hours, and no one was allowed to speak the boys' names aloud, because something was listening, and it didn't like repetition. By December, the rules changed again. Staff were no longer assigned to monitor the boys. They were assigned to be near them, not to observe, but to anchor the anchors. 1 staff member per boy, chosen not for skill, but for emotional detachment, they had to be empty vessels. No past, no strong opinions, no ambition. Why? Because the Timothy Copy, as were no longer interacting with people, they were interacting with belief. One orderly went mad after Subject B repeated the word father 57 times. His eyes turned inward, literally. Coroners found his optic nerves coiled like worms, facing the brain. And carved behind his eyelids, the spiral again. Over and over, the message became clearer. These weren't children. They were projections of a trauma older than mankind. Echoes from a fracture in human understanding. And every day they stayed in that hospital, the air grew heavier, clocks ticked slower, birds stopped nesting on the roof. The land itself recoiled, and the final sign came in the form of a letter. Unsigned, unstamped, delivered directly into the lead doctor's locked drawer. Inside, one sentence written in blood. The fourth has remembered. He is coming. The fourth has remembered. He is coming. That's all the letter said. No signature, no seal, just a folded piece of parchment, soggy with blood that hadn't dried. Dr. Elias Grath, the hospital's new administrator, burned the letter, but not before he made a copy by hand. He kept that copy hidden in the lining of his coat until the day he threw himself out of the West Wing window. Witnesses said he was smiling, not in relief, but in awe, because the fourth had come. But he didn't arrive by foot or crate. He didn't come with weather or whisper. He was born in the walls, literally. In January of 1868, patients in the East Corridor began complaining of sounds inside the plaster, scratching, heartbeat rhythms, and then a cry. Maintenance broke open the wall behind room 43, and inside, a space that shouldn't have existed. No blueprints accounted for it, no prior renovations. But there it was, a stone chamber lined with scorched wood and broken clock faces. In the center, a boy, naked, cold, crying, not like a baby, but like a man who's seen too much. And etched into the floor beneath him, perfectly symmetrical, the spiral, again. This one looked like the others. But his eyes were wrong. They weren't grey. They were black. Pitch. Bottomless. He did not speak. He did not eat. But he knew. He began pointing. At staff members who would die within 48 hours. At doors that hadn't yet opened. At ceilings that would later collapse. At clocks that would spin backwards during thunderstorms. And then he pointed at the sky, for hours, unblinking. One nurse, Hannah Lister, claimed he was trying to signal something. She watched him for 7 nights and began copying the gestures into a notebook. By the 8th night, she couldn't stop. She scratched symbols into her skin, into the walls, into her own eyes. She screamed one phrase before they took her away. He's not the fourth, he's the first returning. From then on, the hospital's reflection protocols tripled. Every mirror was removed, every window sealed, and every clock replaced with a candle. Because time no longer held inside those walls. It buckled, warped, looped. Even photographs began failing. Pictures taken of the boy in the wall came back blank. Except for one, where instead of a child, a figure in a black robe stood in the same place, holding a mirror that reflected the camera. The message was clear. This is no longer science. This is prophecy. And Timothy Caldwell was no longer one boy. He was the infection of memory itself. Memory is not a record, it's a permission. By February 1868, the air around Caldwell Memorial Hospital was no longer breathable in the ordinary sense. The residents of Taro Creek, just 11 miles north, began reporting mass hallucinations. But they weren't hallucinations. They were memories of events that never occurred. Families recalling funerals of relatives who never died. Children waking up fluent in forgotten languages. And worst of all, drawings of the boy. Uncoached, unprompted, dozens of them. Every school in the region saw it happen. Children drawing the same boy. Grey shirt, hollow eyes, standing in front of something that looked like a clock, made of teeth. One teacher, Miss Lavinia Cole, noticed something else. The drawings weren't just similar. They were identical, stroke for stroke, line for line. As if each child had traced the same impossible original, and when she overlaid them, one detail emerged that hadn't been obvious before. A shape in the corner. Not a person, not quite. More like a shadow made of decisions not taken. Like a parent that never had a child. Like a door that was never opened. They called it the undoer. That week, Miss Cole disappeared. She was found hanging from the rafters of her classroom, her hands folded perfectly inward, palms kissing, fingers interlocked. Not in prayer, in mimicry of the Timothy position. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the fourth boy had still not spoken, but he had begun walking, not through the halls, through dreams. Nurses began waking with mud on their feet. Orderlies reported waking up in other people's beds, sometimes across the compound. And every time they tried to document these disturbances, their notes came back rewritten. Always the same line at the top of the page: "You've remembered it wrong." One janitor, Philip Crane, made the mistake of filming the fourth boy with a prototype image lantern. He developed the plate in secret, alone in the boiler room. What he found killed him. His body was discovered inside the furnace, unburned, but twisted into a spiral. Vertebrae turned like corkscrews, eyes missing, tongue wrapped 3 times around the neck like a snake. But the photo was still there, and it wasn't a boy in the picture. It was the entire town of Taro Creek, but wrong. The photo showed streets that never existed, homes made of black stone, a steeple that bled, and people with no faces standing in front of the hospital, watching the building breathe, because the fourth boy hadn't come to be studied. He had come to wake something up, and the town had already begun to dream of it. You cannot contain what remembers you. By the spring of 1868, Caldwell Memorial Hospital was no longer a place. It was a memory loop, a living construct that bent time, identity, and language. The state attempted an emergency shutdown. They sent 12 officials, 3 doctors, and a demolition crew with enough dynamite to level the compound. None of them returned. The only thing found, a single envelope nailed to a birch tree outside the perimeter. Inside it, a hand-drawn map. Not of the hospital, but of the same town that appeared in the forbidden photograph. Taro Creek. Reversed. The river ran uphill. The school stood upside down, and in place of the hospital stood a black well. No water, just a ladder going down. Forever. Inside the hospital, the fourth Timothy had begun speaking, but never in front of others, only through reflections. If a mirror was uncovered by mistake, he'd appear behind the observer, mouthing words. People who saw him would freeze, then bleed from the nose, then speak in tongues that were never human. Dr. Benjamin Clark, the last known surviving member of the original staff, left a series of audio notes on wax cylinders before his disappearance. In one of the final recordings, he whispered, "He's not learning from us. He's studying how we forget. And once he understands that, he'll begin unmaking." Then the power inside the hospital failed. But the building kept glowing, pulsing from the inside, like a heart or a womb. Windows would flicker, walls would sweat, and clocks, even the candle ones, began rotating in unnatural patterns. 1 circle, then 3, then back, then still. That night, the screams started. Not from patients, from the floors, from the wood, from the concrete and the copper piping, as if the structure itself was remembering the trauma inflicted on those within it. Nurses were found with their eyes Ned completely white. Some stood in their rooms unmoving for days. Others would scream until their jaws dislocated and their throats bled dry. And one by one, The original 3 Timothys, the ones still restrained, vanished. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, just empty beds and burned spirals where their shadows had been. The 4th boy remained, but now he was multiplying. Several staff members claimed to see him in opposite wings at the same time. Some said he whispered secrets into their ears while standing miles away. Others found him in their childhood photos, decades before he was ever born. By May, Caldwell Hospital had 1 patient left, the 4th Timothy. Except no one could tell which one was the original anymore, because everyone who walked through those doors eventually became a part of him. Some things aren't erased, they're agreed upon. In June of 1868, Caldwell Memorial Hospital burned to the ground. At least, that's the official story. There was no fire, no wreckage, no smoke reported by nearby towns. Yet all records were updated to reflect total destruction. Newspapers ran identical headlines across 3 states. Tragedy averted, abandoned hospital removed. But survivors knew better. Because there were no survivors. Not a single staff member, not a single patient, not a single birth or death certificate remained in public records. Even the original blueprints of the building were rewritten. The town of Taro Creek filed a protest, then vanished from state maps. The mayor, school teachers, and 41 children, gone. Not in death, but in cartographic annihilation. Dr. Clark's final recording, the one marked "Do Not Play," was destroyed in a controlled vault purge. But a written transcript, allegedly recovered by an unknown archivist, reads, "You do not kill this kind of anomaly, you negotiate with it, and you offer yourself as tribute in exchange for silence." The government acted swiftly. A secret committee, believed to be a precursor to what would one day become MK Ultra, launched Operation Soft Veil. The goal: reverse memory, replace reality with consensus. Ensure that what happened in Caldwell was never spoken of again. So they rewrote textbooks, confiscated family heirlooms, destroyed children's drawings. But it didn't work, because the drawings kept coming back. And not just in America, in Vienna, in Prague, in villages across Siberia. Identical renderings of the 4th boy, the same black eyes, the same tooth clock behind him, the same smile made of absence. Worse, survivors began to replicate his behaviors. A child in Kansas was found standing in the Timothy position inside her mother's closet. She'd been missing for 2 days. When they found her, she whispered, "He's behind your words now." And then there was the school in Marseille. 12 children vanished during a routine fire drill. The only evidence left behind? A single piece of chalk dragging itself across the blackboard, over and over. He doesn't need the building anymore. Because Timothy had learned something, he didn't need to exist physically. He only needed to exist in our collective memory, in our fears. In the corner of our thoughts, where doubt lives, where trauma hides, where truth is traded for comfort. And in that space, he found a home. The most dangerous infection is one that can rewrite how you define reality. By the time the 20th century dawned, Timothy Caldwell was no longer a missing child. He had become a code embedded in the failures of modern psychiatry. From 1901 to 1949, 31 asylums across the United States filed internal reports marked classified. Each described a child patient exhibiting identical symptoms: no name, no history, no language, just watching. Each one drew the same image: a black spiral, a house with no doors, and a figure in the corner holding its own tongue like a leash. Doctors dismissed it as coincidence, a collective delusion, but in classified meetings a different term was used: Timothy-type anomaly. In 1913, at the Stewart Institute for Neurocognitive Disorders, a 5-year-old boy was admitted under emergency orders. He hadn't spoken in 3 years. When asked his name, he pressed a finger to his lips. When shown a mirror, he backed away and said one word: hollow. That night, all cameras in the East Wing malfunctioned. At 3:22 a.m., every nurse in the building began vomiting blood. The boy was found sitting cross-legged in the surgical theatre, drawing an upside-down clock with bone fragments from his own fingers. He died shortly after. But 2 weeks later, an identical child arrived at a separate institute in Maine. No records, same black eyes, same spiral on the palm, same refusal to speak, unless alone with mirrors. It wasn't a haunting. It was a pattern. Psychiatrists began seeing it in their notes, phrases they swore they didn't write. He watches in static. Don't say his name backward. He feeds on misdiagnosis. He is not one child. He is the shape of lost ones. In 1942, the United Kingdom reported its first Timothy incident. An orphanage in Norwich. Every photograph of the children taken before his arrival now showed an extra figure in the corner. Blurry, unfocused, but unmistakably him. When they tried to burn the photos, they wouldn't ignite. Even the negatives resisted destruction. In desperation, governments initiated Project Threshold, a joint effort between American, British, and Soviet minds to track and contain anomalies of inherited memory. But it was already too late. Timothy had moved from mirrors into film, then into tape, then into the electromagnetic hum beneath static. That cold silence on radios between stations. Some said if you listened long enough you could hear him whispering, "I remember when you were afraid. Let me bring you back there." He wasn't haunting the institutions anymore. He was becoming them. You don't bury an idea, you compress it into data. By the early 2000s, whispers of Timothy Caldwell had all but vanished from public record. No Wikipedia entries, no archived footage. Even FOIA requests returned empty envelopes or were marked "file not found." But something stranger was happening. A pattern in corrupted files. Programmers at a defunct military tech lab in Nevada discovered an anomaly inside an old Cold War database. Inside a folder titled Zeta OS, they found a corrupted video. No metadata, no codec recognized it. It wouldn't play unless you renamed the file to Timothy.mp4. Then it played, but only once. What played was 44 seconds of a silent room. No walls, no color, only a boy, facing away from the camera, standing motionless in the center. At 0:31, he turns. But only his eyes move. Black, reflective, empty. At 0:42, the screen glitches. The face becomes a spiral, and the phrase, "Do you remember me now?" burns into the bottom corner in red, flickering text. Every employee who viewed the file reported vivid dreams of a hospital hallway without end. Each woke up with nosebleeds, fevers, and one repeating phrase etched into their subconscious. "He's in the firmware now." Attempts to delete the file failed. Even formatting the hard drive simply moved the file to another location. Eventually, they melted the physical server, only to find the phrase, "Hello again," appear on the BIOS splash screen of every replacement unit. It didn't stop there. In 2014, an underground forum known as The Fourth Boy began circulating a browser-based puzzle. At first glance, it seemed like a standard ARG, until players noticed something chilling. The deeper you got into the levels, the more your own personal data began showing up in the game. Your location, your camera feed, the names of your childhood friends, and a recurring photo, a black and white, the image of a boy standing inside your house. The game was taken down after a user reportedly gouged his own eyes out during a Twitch livestream, screaming, "He's behind the screen! He's behind the screen!" A week later, the domain reappeared. Same site, same game, but with a new splash image, a child's handprint, and below it the phrase, "You gave me your attention, now I'm alive. This is the cost of remembering him." This is what happens when an unsolved anomaly is digitized. Timothy isn't a person anymore. He's an infection, not of the body, but of memory, perception, and trust. And now that we've said his name, he's listening again. A virus kills the body. A doctrine rewires the mind. By the mid-2010s, the name Timothy Caldwell had morphed into something far more dangerous than folklore. He was no longer a mystery to be solved. He was a pattern to be replicated. Across forums, conspiracy boards, and dark web video vaults, a strange belief system began to emerge, one that didn't ask for followers, it infected them. They called themselves the Echoed. Not a cult, not a religion. A network of silence. They claimed Timothy was not an individual, but a conceptual breach in the human timeline. A signal, ancient and broken, repeating itself through the minds of susceptible children. And the key to surviving him was not in resisting. It was in mirroring him. Members of the Echoed practiced stillness therapy, voluntary mutism, staring at mirrors for hours at a time, drawing spirals in ash on their walls and floors. Some even underwent minor neurological surgeries to disable recognition of lies. One document recovered from an underground retreat in West Virginia read, "Language is where he waits. Speech is the invitation. If you name him, you are no longer yourself." Timothy had become the silence between words, the gap between memory and identity. Not a ghost, not a boy, but the force that erases meaning itself. In 2019, a child psychologist named Dr. Elaine Corbin published a controversial paper titled "The Uninitiated: Cases of Cognitive Nullification in Post-Digital Children." She had spent 12 years interviewing children from rural areas, all under the age of 10, all with no internet access. Yet they all described the same dream: a boy in a white hospital gown, standing under a red sky, whispering the words, "This is where they left me." When shown historical sketches of Timothy from the 1860s, they pointed immediately. That's the boy, the one who hums in the walls, the echo. Ed had no online presence, no recruitment, only scattered reports of disappearances, mostly children. What do they believe? That Timothy is the corrective force for a world addicted to falsehood. That he erases not out of malice, but out of necessity. That we have gone too far into self-deception, and he is the price for remembering what we were before words. Timothy doesn't want worship. He wants parity. Not one Timothy, but millions. Each born in silence. Each watching. Each waiting. And some believe he's already succeeded. He wasn't born. He was triggered. By now, you've felt it. That flicker of discomfort. The crawling sensation that Timothy Caldwell was never just a child, not a boy in pain, not a lost mind, but a designed event. It's time to ask the forbidden question, the one no archive, no university, no government lab dares to consider. What if Timothy wasn't the anomaly, but the intended outcome? The 1865 birth records show 4 stillborn children at Redgrove Asylum. Timothy was never listed among them, not officially, but deep in a declassified telegraph transmission dated September 19, 1865, there's a phrase, Caldwell Unit, responsive, first iteration held pattern, awaiting instructions. Unit. Not child, held pattern, not survived. Timothy was never meant to grow up. He was a reaction to something buried, ancient, and deeply incompatible with the human mind. Certain historians now refer to the Caldwell incident as a psychological reset event, a prototype, a test, to see if the human mind could be broken, rebuilt, and turned inward, not with chemicals, but with perception. What followed was a century of cover-ups, experiments, and manipulation. The CIA's MK-Ultra, a continuation. The digital memory implants of the 1990s, refinements. The viral image phenomena and creepypasta legends. Mass simulations of how long a synthetic trauma could echo before breaking the host. Timothy was the origin point, the seeded trauma. And he's still growing. Every urban legend that doesn't fade, every dream of a child whispering through static, every time your screen flickers and you swear you saw eyes that weren't yours, it's him, because Timothy is not a who. He's a what, A process, a mechanism, a method of installing fear in the root directory of your consciousness. Ask yourself, why is there no official record? Why do FOIA files vanish? Why does no media outlet dare to speak his full name? Because they're not allowed to. Because you've already said it. And that's the final trap. By watching this, by remembering this, by even doubting it, you've made space in your mind. You've given him processing power. He's not in Redgrove anymore. He's not in the file. He's not even in the machine. He's in you. And now, when the lights flicker, when the static buzzes just slightly too long, and a child's voice echoes from the silence of your thoughts, don't answer. Because the second you acknowledge him, the second you say his name aloud, he becomes real again. They buried the files, they silenced the doctors, and they told us it was all in our heads. But the eyes of Jeremiah Holbrook are still staring back. Not from the past, but from the lie we're all still living. You've seen the truth now, so tell me, when the next boy starts counting bodies, will you dare to listen?